Jutaan orang bahkan tidak menyadari bahwa mereka bisa menghasilkan 1.000 US dollar sehari tanpa
yang keren artis cover lagi.
just below 350 basis points on Bloomberg Barclays High Yield Index. We've come down to those tights several times this year. We're right on top of them right now, and we've struggled to hold them. Why is this time different, if you think it's different at all?
Well, I wouldn't say this time is different. There continues to be a major global search for yield, and there's a lot of pressure to find that yield. This is one of the few spaces where you can get that return. It's really about credit risk, and ultimately, you've seen the U.S. yield curve start to normalize somewhat relative to the past. So I think you're going to see that filter through over the longer run curve. But fundamentally, there's just so much liquidity out there still, and there's a lot of sort of field. You're going to continue to see that dynamic play out.
Will your fundamentals improve this year as those spreads have tightened? Have you seen that backed up by corporate fundamentals?
Not necessarily. There hasn't been a major shift toward improvement. And I think we're talking about as close to recession risk. Obviously, earnings not being as strong as one would like. So fundamentally, that filters through to the lower credit, high leverage, and big debtors out there. That's the space where there's greater risk. So no.
Lisa?
Look, I think when we drill down and kind of peel the onion on what's going on in high yield, we're starting to see some cracks, right? So if we look at the extremes, levered loan market, we saw downgrades up about 106%, over the last quarter, which is a material move. If you look at triple C's and you really, pull out what's going on, triple C's are starting to crack and have kind of stayed wide. So our perspective, and it goes back to that, small and mid cap profit deterioration, that feeds into that, lower end of the quality credit market. And so we think that there's reason to be cautious and there's reason to be vigilant at a minimum in terms of reaching for that yield.
Big week ahead as well, not just for the economic data, but for the Fed decision in focus. Payrolls Friday just around the corner as well. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Michael McKee, shall we, for a quick look ahead. Hey, Mike.
Hey, John, well, we don't get payrolls, as you mentioned, until Friday. A lot of data between now and then. Today's data, consumer confidence from the conference board. A lot of people watching this because Fed has said it's all about the consumer now. They're holding up the economy. The problem with trying to get a read out of this data is that it is very closely tied to the job market. As the job market tightens, consumer confidence in the conference board numbers goes up. For the Michigan numbers, it's the stock market, but you can see the tight relationship there. And so you kind of have to look at what Alan Greenspan said about these confidence numbers that everybody follows so closely. He said, we watch what they do, not what they say. So the conference numbers, the conference board confidence numbers, something to look at, but really you want to look for retail sales ahead and spending ahead. And we do get the spending numbers on Thursday, so that will be important. Now, going forward with the Fed, you've been talking about what happens next, and I know that Gabriella was saying that they're pessimistic. Well, that's kind of the way the market is looking at it too. You look at dots go, and you put in the numbers for Fed funds futures trading, and they're still looking at a drop in the Fed funds rate, not just this week, but into 2020. So there's some pessimism out there. How does the market trade that? That's going to be a very interesting question, and it may really depend on what Jay Powell said, because as, again, you were talking about earlier, you take a look at where we are in the 10-year, and it has been range-bound since the end of August in a fairly tight trading range, given where it had come from, up in the threes, and it's not likely to move a lot out of that unless the Fed signals much more of a drop going forward. Probably won't get that. So then the question becomes, do we get much of a transmission in monetary policy to the consumer? That's what a lot of people are concerned about, that the Fed may be cutting rates for pushing on the street.
Mike McKee, thank you. We'll continue with this conversation with Diane Swank and Grant Thornton on the strength of the consumer running the following. We're in a more fragile situation where consumers are more skittish, they're more susceptible to negative news and negative news shocks, even though we've got what should be great underlying fundamentals. Gabby, please add to that your thoughts.
So we've had very strong second quarter for consumer spending, over 4.5%. Tomorrow, when we get GDP, we should see a bit of a cooling off in that rate, around 2.5%. So still good, still more than enough to keep overall economic growth in positive territory. But as I was mentioning, we're still a bit cautious because we have seen a slowdown in the pace of hiring, right? So businesses have felt a little bit more skittish, not just about investment, but also about hiring. And that's that super, super important link that if that breaks, this consumer life vest deflates.
Lisa, I know this is something that Morgan Stanley has been quite on top of. When we're going to start to see some of the skittishness at the corporate level feed down to what happens in hiring, it's slowly start to hit the consumer.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And so what we're looking for pretty vigilantly is a pickup in unemployment claims. We have not seen it yet. That has been a data series that has just stayed anchored literally at historic lows. But we're going to be watching that as companies, have already gone through the process of saying we've cut capital spending. The little whisper this quarter is we're reducing the rate at which we're doing share repurchase, which is a cash flow issue. We believe that the next shoe to drop, if we don't get a pickup in global GDP in the next 2 quarters, is a reduction in hiring intents and then layoffs.
Final word, William?
Yeah, the U.S. economy is basically 66% based on consumption, and the link there is employment. So if you start to see that turn and people start to feel that they're going to lose their jobs, they're going to save more, spend less. And that's going to really start to hit the U.S. economy, and that's going to hit sentiment.
Guys, you're going to be sticking with me. Coming up on this programme, we'll take it to Europe, where Britain's Prime Minister is making another election push. This time, the opposition is set to support it. That conversation is coming up next, 16 minutes away from the cash open in New York City, with equity futures just a little bit lower. We're down a tenth of 1%. This is Bloomberg.
NBA, the best of the action coming up. Kurdish fighters have just a few hours left now to withdraw from areas along Turkey's border in northern Syria, where they could face renewed attacks from Turkish forces. Under a Russian-brokered deal, YPG troops have until 1500 hours GMT on Tuesday to leave the so-called safe zone set up under the agreement. This will be patrolled by Russian and Turkish troops. Let's go live now to Sanliurfa, near the Turkey-Syria border. Al Jazeera's Osama bin Jabir is there and can tell us more. Under 1 hour, 45 minutes now, Osama, until that deadline. Is that withdrawal going to be complete?
Well, Adrian, 148 out of those 150 hours agreed upon by the Russian and Turkish presidents have now lapsed. And according to Turkish officials, they have not seen the result that they wanted. We've been hearing from the Turkish foreign minister, the defense minister, and other officials saying that they have not seen the kind of withdrawal they were expecting, and that Russia had promised that it will deliver. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in the last 24 hours has said that he is adamant that he will go and root out these fighters from this area. As long as he's whatever it takes, whether with or without the support of his allies. On the ground, we've been hearing more and more reports of fighting on the outskirts. This is, just to explain to you, this is an area where the US forces pulled out. Kurdish fighters were in place. And since the pullout, it's not just Turkish-backed fighters who've come in, also Syrian government forces have made use of this time, the ceasefire truce, and they've come in around this area of the ceasefire between the towns of Tal Abyad and Ras Al Ain. We've been hearing reports of clashes emerging again. In the last few days, we've been hearing sporadic reports of who started the violence, both sides claiming that other side is trying to make territorial gain. So it is a fluid situation on the ground where forces, all of them who are involved here, are trying to make use of the time that's been given to them. And we've been hearing from Turkish officials saying that as early as today, they could start their joint patrols with Russian forces, Russian military police. That would be up to 10 kilometers deep inside Syrian territory, which will fall short of the 30-kilometer deep safe zone that Turkey wants, because it wants to repatriate millions of Syrian refugees which are on its soil.
Osama, many thanks indeed. Al Jazeera's Osama bin Javed now. A December election in the UK now looks an almost certainty after opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn told his MPs to back it. Prime Minister Boris Johnson held a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, a day after his first attempt at getting an election failed to get enough support. Corbyn now says that his condition for supporting an early election, that a no-deal Brexit be taken off the table, has been met. Politicians will vote on the government's new election proposals later on Tuesday. Let's go live now to London. Al Jazeera's Lawrence Lee can tell us more. So, Lawrence, is a December election now a dead cert? What does it mean for Brexit?
Yes, it absolutely is a dead cert. There are lots of reasons, I should say, why politicians don't like an election in December. They worry that people might not want to answer their doors in the dark when campaigners go around polling opinion. Imagine, for example, as well, if there was a huge dump of snow or flooding in parts of the country the day before and people couldn't get out to vote. Logistical problems, but they've got no choice, frankly, because Boris Johnson's pledge that Brexit would happen by the 31st of October turned out to be a paper tiger. And they've only got a 3-month extension from the European Union, which demanded that some big event was held inside that period to try to change the dynamic. They've got no choice but to do it. The Conservatives had said for ages that they were very happy to do it. Two of the other opposition parties, the Scottish Nationalists and the Liberal Democrats, threw their weight behind it as well. And that left the Labour Party, the main opposition, in a very peculiar position where, having said for months that they wanted an election, they then said they didn't want an election in December. Really, even though they wouldn't say so, because they're quite a long way behind in the opinion polls. But anyway, when Jeremy Corbyn announced it today, he certainly made it sound as if he was putting a brave face on it and looking forward to it.
We always said we wanted an election, we do want an election, but we wanted no deal to be taken off the table. We've now had confirmation from all 28 EU member states that no deal is off the table, so we're going to go out there with the biggest campaign this party has ever mounted, totally united, totally determined. I am absolutely looking forward to going every part of this country with my wonderful shadow cabinet team here and all the fantastic Labour activists to give a message of hope where there isn't one with this government.
Confident talk there from the leader of the opposition, but as you say, Lawrence, Labour dragging well behind in the polls. Who's going to win this election?
Should we put a bet on it? In the end, there's every reason why it might be a hung parliament, Adrian, to be honest with you. The parties that are really looking forward to it, let's put it this way, the parties looking forward to it the most are those which have the most direct positions. So the Scottish Nationalists, the Liberal Democrats, both want to cancel Brexit completely. They're going up very strongly. The Polish Scottish Nationalists might win every seat in Scotland, frankly. And on the other side, the Brexit party, led by Nigel Farage, which wants a no-deal Brexit, will hope to make gains because Boris Johnson hasn't got Brexit done in the way that he promised he would. Inside the two main parties, the Conservatives and Labour, there are splits. A lot of the Conservatives want it, a lot of the Conservatives are worried that because Johnson hasn't done Brexit, they're going to lose out to the Brexit party. Equally, the Labour Party, there are lots of MPs who worry that Jeremy Corbyn isn't very popular and their position on Brexit is as clear as mud, frankly, in terms of what they actually want, and people don't understand it. It's 3.5 years since the referendum happened, and for all the things that have happened, nothing has actually changed since then, except the public is now completely polarised and very, very confused about what to do. And in that sense, you hope that the election's going to offer clarity about people whether they do want Brexit at all anymore, or whether they don't. But the last election, everyone thought the Conservatives would easily, and Labour did much better. It was another hung parliament, and so I think there's every chance that might happen again. In which case, we all run off screaming into the night, don't we? Because there's no idea how you finish it.
Yeah, we can hear the shouts of "Stop Brexit" behind you. I was just looking for a report that we had earlier on. I can't find it now, but one of Britain's bookmakers, Lawrence, reckoning that it's a dead certain the Conservatives will win. So I don't think I'm going to bet with you. Many thanks indeed, Lawrence Lee there, live in London. The Emir of Kuwait has called for an end to the GCC crisis. In June 2017, 3 Gulf nations imposed a blockade on Qatar, cutting off air and sea links and withdrawing diplomats. Since then, Kuwait's Emir has been trying to mediate to bring an end to the crisis.
It is imperative to draw your attention to the unrest storming around our region, which poses grave threats and repercussions not only to our stability and security, but also our future generations. It is no longer acceptable to have an ongoing dispute amongst our brotherly Gulf Cooperation Council states. Such disputes have weakened our capabilities and undermined our gains. This demands us all to immediately rise above our differences, mend fences, and restore our friendly relations.
The top White House expert on Ukraine is due to testify at the impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump later on Tuesday. Some politicians believe that Alexander Vindman could provide details about why and how U.S. military aid to Ukraine was delayed. It comes as the U.S. House of Representatives prepares to vote this week on whether to formalize the impeachment investigation. The move's in response to complaints from Trump that the process is illegitimate. Let's go live down to Washington. Our White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett is with us. Kimberly, what can we expect from this testimony today, and what is President Trump saying about it? Is he worried?
Judging from the number of tweets the president's been sending out, he seems to be worried and is trying to get ahead of this message. What we're expecting that we'll hear from the Army colonel, who's a member of the National Security Council, is that when he was listening in on this call, and this is significant because this is the first time that there is testimony from somebody who actually listened in on that now infamous phone call between the U.S. president back in July and the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky. What we expect that this Army colonel, who's a member of the National Security Council, will tell the impeachment inquiry committee is that it was 2 different times that he notified superiors that he was very concerned that the U.S. president had linked foreign aid to an investigation or desire for Ukraine to investigate a U.S. citizen, namely Joe Biden, the former vice president, in essence, in order to help Donald Trump politically. He says that he was concerned about this because, in his view, it is not proper for a foreign government to be investigating a U.S. citizen. Now, Donald Trump has on Twitter Tuesday morning had an awful lot to say about this. Not only has he called this, as he has in recent days, a secretive process, but he's also saying, look at the transcript or the memo or the notes of that phone call has already been made public, and the testimony that is about to be heard by these committees in Capitol Hill is not consistent with that transcript. There was never any quid pro quo. There was never any linkage, contingent aid being contingent on this investigation. He also says, I knew people were listening. Why would I say something inappropriate? All this is the Democrats. They didn't get the results they were hoping for with the Russia inquiry, so now they've pivoted to Ukraine and are trying to distract the American public, he alleges, from historic gains in the economy and unemployment.
White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett there reporting live from Washington. Many thanks, Kimberly. Well, Scott Lucas is a professor of international and of US and international politics at the University of Birmingham. He says that President Trump, of course, will be worried about what Vindman has to say.
He's the top official on the U.S. National Security Council for Ukraine. He was one of the White House officials who probably spoke with the CIA official who brought the formal complaint in August that started this process and eventually started the impeachment inquiry, because Vindman heard the phone call between Donald Trump and the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, on July 25th, in which Trump raised the matter of the investigations. So the Republicans and Trump cannot say this is secondhand information. And on top of that, Vindman is a decorated veteran. A Ukrainian American that has served in the military forces, is a lieutenant colonel, so he can't be dismissed, as Trump has done with the other witnesses, as a radical, unelected bureaucrat. As dramatic as this high, it could go even further. For example, Charles Kupperman, who was the deputy national security advisor, is holding out against testifying to the committee and trying to defy a subpoena. John Bolton, the national security advisor, may be subpoenaed. Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, might be subpoenaed. So in other words, there's a competition here. The White House is continuing to try to block this inquiry. They have failed to a significant extent. They are still succeeding with some witnesses. But in the end, how high will this go in terms of the taking of testimony before we get the formal vote on impeachment, which will probably take place about the end of this year in the House of Representatives?
Things are looking pretty wet in parts of Vietnam. Here to tell us more is meteorologist Kevin Corriveau.
That's right, Adrian. We do have a developing storm system here in the South China Sea, and the clouds are really beginning to start to get a little bit more organized over the last 24 hours. Now, the waters are very warm here in the South China Sea. That gives the storm the strength and the moisture that it needs over the next few days. So watch what happens as we go towards Wednesday, getting very close to the coastline here in Vietnam. Heavy rain is expected to fall. We do expect flooding to be a major problem across much of this area. By Thursday, we do think probably a tropical storm will be making landfall. But take a look at how much rain we do expect to see across much of the area. Anywhere north of Ho Chi Minh, we could be seeing about 250 millimeters of rain or more. So that means flash flooding is going to be a major problem there. And then here in the Arabian Sea, we have been watching this particular storm for quite a while right now. It is moving quite slow across much of the area. Still, the winds are up to about 215, gusting even higher. That would make it equivalent to a category 4 hurricane. And we're talking several countries are being affected right now along their coastlines. Not just Oman, up here towards Iran, as well as over here towards Pakistan as well. We are seeing some very high surf. We are seeing rip currents, and we are seeing inland flooding. So this is a storm we're going to be watching at least for the next few days, but still not a landfall, but still impacts along many coasts there. Back to you.
Kevin, many thanks indeed. We're at the midway point in this news hour. Still to come on the program, struggling to get treatment. How US sanctions are hitting Iran's healthcare system. The fight against plastic in Kenya, why the government there feels that it needs to do more. And in sport, the rugby player who's never started for England but could play in the World Cup final.
Overthrown and exiled.
They point a gun, saying, if you don't dismiss, we will kill you.
An intimate film about the struggle of the elected leader of Madagascar to return to his country and reinstate his presidency.
We know is that the coup was French inspired, and we've heard that the non-negotiable French position is that Poland and Ireland will not return to the US.
Return of a president on Al Jazeera.
The latest news as it breaks.
This is how the clashes have been ongoing. Mostly young people coming here to protest against the government and clashing with the police.
With detailed coverage.
It's meant to be a chance for people from different walks of life, different political affiliations to work together, to shape their futures together.
From around the world.
Not many people buy physical newspapers anymore, but what these front pages represent is a much broader conversation.
It is good to have you with us. Hello, Adrian Finnegan here in Doha. Let's remind you of the main news story this hour, the tension in Lebanon after supporters of Hezbollah tore down tents that were put up by anti-government protesters. Police have broken up rallies. Hezbollah forms part of Prime Minister Saad Hariri's government. The Prime Minister himself is due to address the nation within the next half hour. Let's take you live now to Beirut. Al Jazeera's Zaina Hodda is there. Zaina, what's happening right now?
Well, tension in the streets of the Lebanese capital. Half an hour ago, this area was a battleground. Security forces using tear gas and rubber-coated bullets to disperse supporters of the government from the area. Now, some of those supporters have returned and are arguing with the security forces, asking them, why did you use force against us? It all started approximately 2 hours ago. Supporters of the government, in particular the two parties, the Amal movement and the Hezbollah movement, they descended from the neighborhood behind us and they forced the anti-government protesters who were blocking this main highway to leave, and then they used force and chased them towards Martyrs Square, which is just a few hundred meters from where we are standing. And once they reached Martyrs Square, they clashed with the protesters who had been there over the past 13 days. They destroyed tents, and the situation really was very, very dangerous. Security forces were then called in, and like I mentioned they use tear gas. So there's a very dangerous situation on the ground because this crisis is now spilling onto the streets. What began as a protest movement demanding better economic conditions, better rights, the government stop imposing taxes, is now a very serious political crisis that has divided the streets.
So, Zainab, I mean, just how dangerous is this situation for Lebanon? You know, given the country's recent history and all of the various factions that make up its society and also its government, what could happen here if things go wrong?
The street is divided politically. There's a sectarian divide. The supporters of the government believe the protest movement has an ultimate aim to push a certain agenda, to topple those in power who won in the 2018 elections. They believe the protest movement is about bringing in a new pro-Western alliance, if you like. Those in power are supporters of Iran and the Syrian government. Really, the divide in Lebanon is a reflection of the divide in the region. And people are armed. This country is awash with weapons. And it's not just that. Security forces are divided. The different security agencies allied with certain political parties. What we saw over the past 2 hours, the supporters, what they're saying is that, you know, we're fed up. They have no right to block the roads. They have no right to paralyze the country. We want to be able to reach our work. But people in the anti-government protests will say, no, they were sent here to put pressure on us because there are reports that the Prime Minister is not going to resign. And yes, there are reports that the Prime Minister in the next half hour or so is going to address the nation and announce his resignation, which has been a demand of the protest movement. So the situation, I know we use the word dangerous time and time again. Lebanon is not immune to political crises. There have been political crises over the years. But this divide, when people start taking to the streets and clashing in the streets, that is when it becomes very, very dangerous.
All right, Zainab, we'll leave you for the moment. We'll be back with you if there are any developments. Zainab Holiday reporting live from Beirut. Many thanks indeed, and we will take that statement from. Now, parts of the U.S. state of California are bracing for strong winds on Tuesday, which are expected to further fuel wildfires. Thick smoke plumes can be seen from space. A state of emergency has been declared as firefighters battle to get the fires under control. At least 8 properties have been destroyed and 200,000 people have been told to leave their homes. More than 2 million people are without power. Let's take you live now to Los Angeles for an update on the situation. Jay Gray is with us. Jay, what's the latest?
Adrian, I can tell you in this burned out neighborhood, it's been a constant fight throughout the late evening and into the early morning now, just ahead of sunrise, where we've seen crews on the ground moving in, choppers overhead dumping water in areas where hotspots have flared up, more flames in an area that's already suffered some of the worst fire in this part of the state. Now, we've seen fires burning not only here in the Los Angeles area, but really through the north to the wine country outside of San Francisco. More than a dozen wildfires in all, many of them still burning out of control, and real concern that the winds that are pushing these flames, that are grabbing the embers, are going to intensify over the next 24 hours.
Yeah, there had been a lull in the wind, Jay. That's now expected to increase again, the wind speed, in the next couple of hours. I mean, was that lull helpful? Did the firefighters manage to get anything under control?
Yeah, it's a great point you make, and they did manage to gain some ground on this fire. By no means do they say that they've got any sense of control. They will tell you that Mother Nature is still winning the battle here right now. And while they did gain some ground, they understand that as those winds intensify, and some forecasters say we could see the strongest winds historically we've seen in quite some time in this region, they know that they're in for a tough fight. And like I said earlier, these are swirling winds that throw the embers miles away, spark new flames, new fires, and so they're in a constant state of moving, a constant fight with the elements here. And it doesn't look like it will let up, at least through the weekend. Containment much further away than that.
Jay, many thanks. Jay Gray reporting live there from Los Angeles. Many thanks. Now, the biggest protests in a generation show no sign of letting up in Chile. That's even after President Sebastian Piñera replaced a third of his cabinet in response to days of demonstrations. Security forces again fought with protesters as tens of thousands of people marched through the capital on Monday. Boris van der Spek is editor-in-chief and founder of Chile Today. He joins us now via Skype from the capital, Santiago. Good to have you with us, sir. Why aren't these protests dying down then, despite the president removing a third of his cabinet?
Well, of course, like you say, they get a president on Monday or on Saturday, he removes part of his cabinet. But for these protesters, it's far from enough, because these protesters are not protesting this government. They are not protesting a few ministers. They are protesting an entire system that they want to have reformed. And if you talk about a couple of ministers going away and having some others entering the government, that's just a change of faces. So that doesn't mean anything for these protesters. They want more rigorous reform. So for them, the protest, the fight is far from over.
Okay, who are these protests, Boris? These protests.
So you've got at this moment, it started out as just a nationwide protest of Chileans have already been forced to go back to work, actually, because they can't keep protesting. So at this moment, it's more students protesting, some opposition sectors joining these protests, although they are part of the very system. But it's basically that students and a couple of Chileans who are still out there.
15 parliamentarians have filed a complaint against the president under the constitution. Could that lead to anything?
Yes, well, it could. This is a very interesting procedure, and it has been filed because of human rights violation. In the last week, 20 people have died. Their investigation of sexual abuse committed by state agents. Have enough signatures to proceed with the process. It has to go through Congress, and the opposition has a majority in Congress, but then it has to pass through the Senate. And right now the government has the majority in the Senate, so this might be very difficult.
Boris, many thanks indeed. Good to talk to you. Boris van der Spek there in Santiago.
All right.
Hong Kong activist Joshua Wong has been barred from running in the upcoming local council elections. The Electoral Commission says that his nomination is invalid because he'd advocated for screening and censorship. He's the only contender disqualified from the November 24th election. I spoke to Joshua Wong earlier and got his reaction to being barred from the election.
It just proves how Beijing ignore the voice of young generation and bar us to run for office, which show they have no respect on the dissidents that hope to enter the institution.
But they say the problem with you is that you advocate self-determination for Hong Kong, which conflicts with the requirement for candidates to declare they'll pledge allegiance to the city and uphold its constitution.
Self-determination is the right and the fundamental rights that should be enjoyed by people according to the United Nations Charter and the international law. I already openly declared that I did not advocate on Hong Kong independence, and I recognize the importance of the mini constitution of Hong Kong named Basic Law, and how Beijing employ political censorship and screening to bar me to run for office. We just prove that they hope to refuse the whole generation of youngsters and the new generation to enter the institution. It will just trigger more people who continue to take to the street.
So will the protests go on?
And even disqualify my candidacy, it will just let the international community to aware that how Hong Kong is far away from high degree autonomy, and election in Hong Kong is under manipulation of Beijing.
Sanctions imposed by the US on Iran are being blamed for limiting Iranians' access to healthcare. A Human Rights Watch report says that economic penalties are stopping companies financing medicines. Washington denies that its policies are impacting medical supplies. Al Jazeera's Asad Baig reports now from Tehran.
Having to battle cancer is tough enough, but here in Iran, patients have to deal with medicine shortages and increased prices.
Of course, high cost of treatment impacts us. Under these sanctions and current economic problems, it really hurts families. Some patients have to spend $200 to $300 a month.
Iran produces most of its own medicines, but drugs needed for rare diseases and specialized treatment need to be imported.
The United States says medicines are exempt from sanctions, but the banks are not. And that's what doctors here in Iran say is the problem.
At this cancer center in Tehran, Dr. Degan says they're having a difficult time.
Because of the sanctions, we have the shortage of the medicines. Also, we have the problem for enhancing the price of the medicines. And also, we could not transfer money in the country because of the bank sanctions.
But it's not just medicine that doctors are worried about. This American machine treats tumors. It was bought from the US before President Donald Trump imposed more sanctions on Iran.
I hope this machine does not break down because we could not provide a new extracts for them. And if anything breaks down, and people's lives are at risk.
Human Rights Watch says under international law, the US should monitor the impact of its sanctions on Iranians' rights and address any violations its sanctions might cause. It also says European countries are afraid to do business with Iran and more needs to be done to assure them that they can export vitally needed medicines.
Prices are very high. The radiation therapy and medicine are expensive. I bought some medicine and paid $4,500 plus the cost of radiotherapy. Prices are very high. Those who do not earn enough, I don't know how they could deal with it.
Patients and doctors are hoping there will be some relief from sanctions, but with no negotiations between the two countries, most fear it will be Iranians who will continue to struggle. Asad Baig, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
2 years ago, Kenya banned plastic carrier bags, but with pollution getting worse, President Uhuru Kenyatta says that single-use plastic will be banned altogether by June 2020. Al Jazeera's Nicholas Huck reports from Nairobi.
Beneath the skyscrapers of Nairobi, thought she would become a doctor. Instead, she's now picking out anything that can be used or reused from this landfill. Today, she's found used plastic intravenous drips, a plastic torchlight, part of a loaf of bread, and a bag of rice. What a waste, says this mother of 10, who supports her family making $2 a day, recycling other people's trash.
People throw away so much, but we try to reuse every bit. I do it for my kids, for my family.
But a ban on plastic bags put in place 2 years ago has made her work a lot harder. They've been replaced by polypropylene bags. They are less polluting, but difficult to recycle and so less profitable for Adongo, who sells them for less than 1 cent. waste and garbage burning, but what smells less? It'll take 10 to 1,000 years for this to disintegrate, and that's what's choking the city. President Kenyatta wants to ban single-use plastic altogether by June 2020. Critics argue it's too little, too late, and will be difficult to implement.
We have this throw-away culture. We like throwing away everything. We are the waste generators, but we want somebody else to pick your waste. So I think it is a responsibility. First, ensure we dispose our waste sustainably. Then educate.
Find out if she did it.